Welcome to this mini-series where we'll be exploring ethnography more in details. What we are going to learn is the purpose and the use of ethnography. We'll try to understand the process of conducting ethnographic research, and we'll be aware of the advantages and limitations of ethnographic research. What is ethnography? Ethnography is a type of qualitative research that involves immersing yourself in a particular community or organization to observe their behavior and interactions up close. The word ethnography also refers to the written report of the research that the ethnographer produces afterwards. Ethnography is a flexible research method that allows you to gain a deep understanding of a group's shared culture, conventions, and social dynamics. However, it also involves some practical and ethical challenges. What is ethnography used for? Ethnographic research originated in the field of anthropology, and it often involved an anthropologist living with an isolated tribal community for an extended period of time in order to understand their culture. Nowadays, ethnography is a common approach in various social science fields. It is used not only to study distant or unfamiliar cultures, but also to study specific communities within the researcher's own society. There are a few key distinctions in ethnography which help to inform the researcher's approach, and these are open or closed settings, overt or covert ethnography, and active or passive observation. Each approach has its own advantages and disadvantages. Let's start with open versus closed settings. The setting of your ethnography, the environment in which you will observe your chosen community in action, may be open or closed. An open or public setting is one with no formal barriers to entry. For example, you might consider a community of people living in a certain neighborhood or the fans of a particular football team. Gaining initial access to open groups is not too difficult, but it may be harder to become immersed in a less clearly defined group. A closed or private setting is harder to access. This may be, for example, a business, a school, a cult. A closed group's boundaries are clearly defined, and the ethnographer can become fully immersed in the setting. But gaining access is tougher. The ethnographer may have to negotiate their way in or acquire some role in the organization. Overt versus covert ethnography. Overt ethnography, we see that the ethnographer openly states their intention and acknowledges their role as a researcher to the members of the group being studied. It is typically preferred for ethical reasons, as participants can provide informed consent. However, people may behave differently with the awareness that they are being studied. Covert ethnography. In covert ethnography, the researcher does not tell participants about their research and comes up with some other pretense for being there. Covert ethnography allows access to environments where the group would not welcome a researcher. However, hiding the researcher's role can be considered deceptive and so unethical. Active versus passive observation. An active role involves trying to fully integrate, carrying out tasks and participating in activities like any other member of the community. Active participation may encourage the group to feel more comfortable with the ethnographer's presence. However, there is a risk of disrupting the regular functioning of the community. A passive role is one in which the ethnographer stands back from the activities of others, behaving as a more distant observer and not involving themselves in the community's activities. Passive observation allows more space for careful observation and note-taking. However, group members may behave unnaturally due to feeling they are being observed by an outsider. Different levels of immersion in the community may be appropriate in different contexts. The ethnographer may be a more active or passive participant depending on the demands of their research and the nature of the setting. While ethnographers usually have a preference, they also have to be flexible about their level of participation. For example, access to the community might depend upon engaging in certain activities, or there might be certain practices in which outsiders cannot participate. An important consideration for ethnographers is the question of access. The difficulty of gaining access to the setting of a particular ethnography varies greatly. To gain access to the fans of a particular sports team, you might start by simply attending the team's games and speaking with the fans. Or to access the employees of a particular business, you might contact the management and ask for permission to perform a study there. Alternatively, you might perform a covert ethnography of a community or organization you are already personally involved in or employed by. Flexibility is important here too. Where it's impossible to access the desired setting, the ethnographer must consider alternatives that could provide comparable information. For example, if you had the idea of observing the staff within a particular finance company, but could not get permission, you might look into other companies of the same kind as alternatives. Ethnography is a sensitive research method, and it may take multiple attempts to find a feasible approach. All ethnographies involve the use of informants. These are people involved in the group in question, who function as the researchers' primary points of contact, facilitating access and assisting their understanding of the group. This might be someone in a high position at an organization, allowing you access to their employees, or a member of the community sponsoring your entry into that community and giving advice on how to fit in. However, if you come to rely too much on a single informant, you may be influenced by their perspective on the community, which might be unrepresentative of the group as a whole. In addition, an informant may not provide the kind of spontaneous information which is most useful to ethnographers, instead trying to show that they believe you want what you want to see. For this reason, it's good to have a variety of contacts within the group. The core of ethnography is observation of the group from the inside. Field notes are taken to record these observations while immersed in the setting. They form the basis of the final written ethnography. They are usually written by hand, but other solutions, such as voice recordings, can be useful alternatives. Field notes record any and all important data: phenomena observed, conversations had, preliminary analysis. For example, if you are researching how service staff interact with customers, you should write down anything you notice about these interactions: body language, phrases used repeatedly, differences and similarities between staff, customer reactions, and so on. Don't be afraid to also note down things you notice that fall outside the pre-formulated scope of your research. Anything may prove relevant, and it is better to have extra notes you might discard later than to end up with missing data. Field notes should be as detailed and clear as possible. It is important to take time to go over your notes, expand on them with further detail, and keep them organized, including information such as dates and location. After observations are concluded, there is still the task of writing them up into an ethnography. This entails going through the field notes and formulating a convincing account of the behaviors and dynamics observed. The goal of a written ethnography is to provide a rich, authoritative account of the social setting in which you were embedded, to convince the reader that your observations and interpretations are representative of the reality. Ethnography tends to take a less impersonal approach than other research methods. Due to the embedded nature of the work, an ethnography often involves discussion of your personal experiences and feelings during the research. Ethnography is not limited to making observations. It also attempts to explain the phenomena observed in a structured, narrative way. For this, you may draw on theory, but also on your direct experience and intuitions, which may well contradict the assumptions that you brought into the research. There are some advantages of ethnographical research. The main advantage of ethnography is that it gives the researcher direct access to the culture and practices of a group. It is a useful approach for learning firsthand about the behavior and interactions of people within a particular context. By becoming immersed in a social environment, you may have access to more authentic information and spontaneously observe dynamics that you could not have found out about simply asking. Ethnography is also an open and flexible method. Rather than aiming to verify a general theory or test a hypothesis, it aims to offer a rich narrative account of a specific culture, allowing you to explore many different aspects of the group and setting. There are also some limitations, though. Ethnography is a time-consuming method. In order to embed yourself in the setting and gather enough observations to build up a representative picture, you can expect to spend at least a few weeks, but more likely several months. This long-term immersion can be challenging and requires careful planning. Ethnographic research can run the risk of observer bias. Writing an ethnography involves subjective interpretation, and it can be difficult to maintain the necessary distance to analyze a group that you are embedded in. There are often also ethical considerations to take into account. For example, about how your role is disclosed to members of the group, or about observing and reporting sensitive information. So the final question is, should you use ethnography in your research? Before choosing ethnographic research, it is worth asking yourself whether it is the right approach. For example, could the information you need be collected in another way? Could you use surveys or interviews? How difficult will it be to gain access to the community you want to study? How exactly will you conduct your research? And over what time span? What ethical issues might arise? If you do decide to do ethnography, it is generally best to choose a relatively small and easily accessible group to ensure that the research is feasible within a limited time frame. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more on ethnography, and I look forward to meeting you all very soon. Goodbye.